that in order to make a lot of money and place yourself in the position to be receptive, you've got to place your focus on bringing value to another human being.
My name is Curt Mercadante, and I'm a speaker, trainer, and disruptive entrepreneur whose mission is to save the world by helping individuals fight for lives of freedom and fulfillment. This show is about helping you create that lifestyle, bringing you interviews with individuals who are disrupting society in a way that empowers you to live that lifestyle of freedom as well. This is the Freedom Club Podcast, and we're grateful you're here. Well, thank you. This is the Freedom Club Podcast. I'm your host, Curt Mercadante. And if you're a member of the Freedom Club community, which I pitch every single episode, you're able to watch this interview in a live stream, participate, see it as it happens live. If you are listening to this podcast, if you're a regular listener to this podcast, or this is your first ever episode, and you're not yet a member of the Freedom Club community, and you're on Facebook, you have no excuse. What are you waiting for? Please go to Facebook, click on or search for the Freedom Club community. You'll see a picture with my ugly mug. Click on it, answer some questions, and you can be in the group. Today, I'm really excited today because we have a very special guest, Bob Burg. And many of you probably know Bob from the book, The Go-Giver, the series of Go-Giver books. And in this best-selling business parable, The Go-Giver, and then the follow-up, The Go-Giver Leader, and again, we're going to talk about the latest book, right, The Go-Giver Influencer, Bob and co-author John David Mann challenged the conventional wisdom about success. And The Go-Giver Influencer is a new and equally compelling story about the power of genuine influence in business and beyond. Bob speaks all over the world on topics related to the Go-Giver, as well as what he calls genuine influence. And while the total book sales number well over 1 million copies, the original book, The Go-Giver, has sold over 850,000 copies and has spurred an international movement. Bob, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure, Curt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, I read The Go-Giver several years ago. I rebought it a week ago and then read The Go-Giver Influencer. And so one of the things I'd like to ask and jump in is, you know, in the book, there are some people, there are main characters who have challenges, right? They have problems that they need to solve. And throughout the books, they have various coaches, mentors, people who didn't maybe know were going to be coaches and mentors. And they're going through it, and they are, in many cases at the beginning, it's like the Karate Kid. Mr. Miyagi has him wax and sand and paint. And why are you having me do this? And I felt like it was a little bit similar. For someone to jump in and be receptive to the lessons in the book, kind of going on the same journey as the main characters in the book, what do you think first has to happen with their mindset to be receptive?
Well, I think first you have to believe there's a need for it, because like anything else, if you don't see that there's a problem or something that needs to change, you're not gonna do it. Why would you? You know, I know with your career, because you did you did an adjustment with your career because you already had a very, very successful career going. And while it's like when you were saying earlier, technology is great until it's not. Your career was wonderful until you realized it maybe didn't provide you with some of the things you really wanted it to provide you with. At that point, now you became open to another way of doing things. And I think it's the same here, whether it's Joe in that first story or whether it's Jackson and Jillian in the last one. There had to be that point where they saw, okay, I thought I was doing things right and that it was working or was supposed to work this way, but maybe it's not. And even though I don't quite understand what these other people are telling me, and I don't quite believe them yet, maybe there's something there because they seem to be at a place where I kind of want to be. And I think at that point, then we're able to maybe say, okay, I'm going to go with this.
It's interesting because, and you brought up kind of my journey, but when I first read The Go-Giver, I was in a different place. I had my agency and I was so focused on, I got to sell and I'm going to pick up a business book and I'm going to sell. And so I read it and I wasn't yet ready. I wasn't yet ready for it, where I think in all the books, it's not just about business. I think it's at its very heart, and disagree with me, please, that they're books about relationships and life. I mean, they talk about relationships with their wives, with their fathers, and that spills over into work, family, self.
I totally agree. Universal laws are universal laws, and principles that tend to work in one area will work in others. Not strategies won't necessarily, tactics or techniques or whatever you want, that won't necessarily transfer, but principles do. That's why they're principles. They're universal truths. So no, I agree with you totally.
Yeah, and so what? In each of the book, people have a business problem that they're trying to solve. Can you tell me a little bit about your process in each? And I'd love to get into the 5 laws and were these lessons that you picked up over time, or did you get together and say, hey, let's put this together. You kind of had a premise. As someone I'm working on a book, I'm always interested in how people come up with different laws. Were these laws that you kind of had out there and knew and you had to crystallize for the books? Or were they ones that it's a system that you had followed for years and said, we're going to put this into book format?
Well, my Go-Giver, my Go-Giver co-author, but for all the series, my co-author, John David Mann, he also was an entrepreneur before he was a writer. So we both come from entrepreneurial backgrounds. And we had both studied success and studied entrepreneurship, studied business, studied people, human nature. Why do people do this? Why do people do that? What makes people successful? What are the consistent qualities in successful people? What have they done? So let me first say, and we've said this plenty of times, we don't make a secret out of this, that there's nothing new in the Go-Giver as far as the laws.
Right.
They've all been around for as long as there have been market economies of one way or another, going back to ancient Babylon, the merchants and the peddlers and the so-and-so. We figure that the successful ones have been utilizing these 5 laws from the original book, from the Go-Giver, starting with that, for as long as there have been market economies. Now, many of them didn't even know they were doing it. They did it very intuitively, and then some people learned them. But one way or another, they had to use these 5 laws. What we did is maybe codify them. We put them into I guess into the written word, using our own names for certain laws, if you will. Okay. But they'd work whether you call them, the law of piano as opposed to the law of compensation, because it's the same thing. You know what I'm saying? So,
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's really like that. It's nothing that John and I take credit for discovering, or inventing, as much as discovering just through our own journey. So we got together with basically the premise being, and this is the premise for I'd say everything Go-Giver, and that is that shifting your focus from getting to giving. And when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing immense value to others, and understanding that doing so is not only a nice way, a more pleasant way of conducting business and living life, it's also the most financially profitable way as well. And if you take it out of the business realm, it's the most profitable even in non-financial terms, when it comes to joy and relationships and so forth.
Yeah, and if you look at the 5 laws, for those of you who are listening who have read the book, you'll know these. For those who don't, I want you to go buy the book. But the 5 laws: the law of value, the law of compensation, the law of influence, the law of authenticity, and the law of receptivity. Obviously, the book's Go-Giver, you talked about giving. At their very heart are relationships.
Yeah.
Which of these 5 laws do you find, when you go and you speak and you work with people, is the hardest for them to accept, for lack of a better term?
Oh, that's actually an easy one. It's the law of receptivity. Not that it's hard for them to accept that they would like that receptivity, but that they have the most difficulty with that.
And why is that?
I think it's the way the world falsely frames prosperity, abundance, money. If you look at it, in terms of what the press has always reported on, or what people look at, or the major themes of movies, it's always the nice person who is always portrayed as being poor but happy. They're poor but happy, and they're honest, and they have all these great positive traits, and they're constantly put down, stepped on, stepped over, taken advantage of by who? The rich person who's mean and nasty and horrible and has no soul. And it's unfortunate, but that's the story that people get told. And so there's what we call the treacherous dichotomy, which is or false dilemma, the unnecessary use of the word or. Would you rather be wealthy or happy? Well, why is it an or? How about yes? But that's not the message most people get. So, you grow up hearing about, these people who did terrible things about, to get rich and to this. And hey, it's a big world. Of course, there are all sorts of stories. There are Enrons out there, and there are Tycos, and there's the guy at the bank who was having his people sell false. There's all those. It's a big world. But by and large, people who make a lot of money, especially to the degree they're operating in a free market-based economy. And when I say free market, I simply mean no one is forced to do business with anyone else. Government's not making a specific rule for you because you've bought the influence of someone in Congress who makes a law making it that keeps the competition out. I'm talking about a free market where people buy and sell. And I often say this, that, I say this when I speak at a sales conference. I'll say, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet, right? They're not going to buy from you because you need the money. They're not going to buy from you because you're a really nice person. They're going to buy from you because they believe that they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. And in a free market, that's the only reason why someone ever should buy from you. This is good, though, because it means that in order to make a lot of money and place yourself in the position to be receptive, you've got to place your focus on bringing value to another human being. This is why we say that money is simply an echo of value, right? It's the thunder to value's lightning. So, but when you're brought up with, and you hear these messages all the time in the world constantly, and you're looked at, if you're making money, you're some selfish, greedy, horrible. Well, now, that gets into your head. So now you've provided all this value to someone, and to people, and you've done such a great job, and now you have an opportunity for the money to come in. All you have to do is be willing to receive it. But the unconscious is saying, but rich people are bad. If I'm rich, it means I had to step on someone else to get this. It means I'm going to change and all of a sudden not be a good right? And I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be Mr. Potter from,
right.
From It's a Wonderful Life. No. And so, that can mess with people. And so I think that's why I suggest reading and studying people like Randy Gage and David Nagel and Bob Proctor and all these great people who write about prosperity and about, being able to deal with that in those internal memes or demons or whatever that are keeping you from. So that's absolutely the one that most people have the most difficult with.
And, I think some of it might go back to what we talked about at the beginning, which was having that mindset at the beginning to be not only receptive in the realm of, or how you talk about it, but receptive to that message. And I like to talk about, I certainly am not the only one who talks about this, scarcity mindset versus abundance,
sure.
Where you see someone who's doing well. And, I've seen this, and my kids, we love Shark Tank. We homeschool our kids. And I think Shark Tank should be required in all schools. Just watching it all day. It's math, it's creativity, it's business sense, it's common sense. But there are those who watch Shark Tank and they'll look at it and say, oh my gosh, it must be nice to have that money to throw around. They must have gotten lucky. I've posted stuff on social media about being at the beach on a Wednesday with my kids, and they say, "Oh, you must have married into money." And I feel like it's exactly what you talk about. Starting with not just, It's a Wonderful Life or some of these, adult movies or grown-up movies, but in kids' movies, the villain is often the tycoon, the bad guy. And that's not to say, like you said, there are bad actors, but there's bad actors,
of course,
everywhere. And I think often we can get conditioned to, like you said,
I think that's what happens. And by the way, I love the movie It's a Wonderful Life. It's just that who would have noticed that, and who would have noticed that message? And see, what happened was one of the guys I study, excuse me, in terms of prosperity, Randy Gage, does the magnificent vignette about the movie Titanic, which at the time was the highest grossing movie ever. And all the memes or mind viruses that are in there about wealth and about poverty and about, this and that, and so what I started doing was every movie I started watching after that, I looked at, is that there, right? Is there a meme there? And then I was watching one of my favorite movies, It's a Wonderful Life, one holiday season, and I started noticing it. And you can notice it with all these. You just start looking at it and that's why, what I like to suggest, Randy says the same thing. David Nagel says the same thing. I'm sure you say the same thing. Start checking premises. Okay. When you hear something, ask yourself, well, why? Why is that true? Is it true? How do I know? How does the person who said that's true know it's true? Where did they hear it from? Okay. And when we start asking ourselves these questions, it causes us to think, and it causes us to question, and it causes us to go deeper, and we stop believing just, what the talking heads of our favorite, television station says, whether you're the progressive left or the conservative right or whatever you happen to be. You stop, you listen, you say, well, why is what they said true? And these are great exercises to help us think. And one of them, when we can start doing that around prosperity, we start being able to really take apart some of those awful unconscious messages that are out there.
Yeah, we could do a whole nother podcast on that, because I get so fired up about, I worked in the political realm for 20 years and I saw the insides of it. But I also see, and I was part of the problem in terms of when you talk about influence in a bad way, the one-way influence of trying to get people riled up and fired up. And the conformity you talk about, again, whether it's the right or the left, of either there's good and there's bad. Yeah. It's black and it's white, and that's it. Whatever your worldview is.
Yeah, well, it used to be, even the political arguments were always, they used to be, I'm right, you're wrong. Now it's, I'm right, you're evil.
Right. Yeah.
And what's extra kind of yucky about that is that, if you feel another person's wrong, you'll try to persuade and you'll engage. Okay. If you feel a person is evil, you're not even going to engage with them. Well, you don't engage with evil. Who would? Okay. Right. There's no hope for them. They're evil. And that's really the issue. And, other than the small number of outliers who really are, looking for bad things to happen, whether on the left or the right or whatever, most people, whether they're way on the left, way on the right, somewhere in the middle, they would like to see a country that's prosperous, where most people are happy and free to live their lives how they see fit, providing they don't infringe upon the rights of others, and, all the things that we would all like. There's two totally different ways of believing is correct to get there. Okay, the left and the right have two totally different ways. Libertarians, as I am, we have kind of even more of our own thoughts. Okay,
yeah.
But it's understanding that most people have good intent. Okay, now good intent plus negative results doesn't equal positive results. That of course, I'm not saying we should just accept and say, oh, whatever. No, let's persuade. That's fine. That's what it's about, persuasion, which also means you leave yourself open to listening. Not so you agree necessarily, but so you understand where that person's coming from. And I'll tell you, one of the best books probably the best book I ever read on this was called The Righteous Mind by Professor Jonathan Haidt, spelled Haidt, but he pronounces it Haidt, who looks at both the left and the right and why they think the way they think. And his own thought processes changed as he went through the whole process of the book. And it wasn't just, well, these people are thinking this because they're idiots, or these people are thinking because they want bad things to happen. No, there are reasons. There's reasons why we think the way we think. And when we can do that and understand it, again, doesn't mean you have to agree. But when you come from a point of understanding, now you can engage, and now persuasion can take place.
You mentioned something here that's a key theme in both the books, in the Go-Giver and the Go-Giver Influencer, which is, sum it up in one word, which isn't a perfect word, but empathy. And in the Go-Giver Influencer, you talk about walking in the other person's shoes. Right. It's a key theme as well in the Go-Giver. And in the influencer, so myself, my daughter, actually, she's the competitive one. She actually competes in boxing bouts, but we all box. Yeah. And so that's, again, the book, it was like, did he write this for me? The influencer. And so a number of the things you say are exactly right, which is, so my boxing coach, he says, listen, I've shown you 8 punches. I've shown you all these different combos, all these different steps. But when you get in to the ring, just remember 2 things: hit and don't get hit. And there's a lot of people who, when they start boxing, they just think about the hit. Well, I'm powerful. I can throw a good punch. And those people usually get in there. They start throwing a ton of punches. They open themselves up because they don't realize there's 2 people in the ring.
Right.
And then they get hit. They get knocked out. They get worn out. But what the coach in the Go-Giver Influencer talks about is paying attention, sizing up your competition, understanding what they're doing. And he talks about, I can't pronounce his name, but I think he was going by Mr. O in Japan, the home run.
Sadaharu O.
Sadaharu, yeah. And he talks about the fact that he considered the pitchers his partner, and understanding that there's 2 people there. But you apply that to business as well.
Yeah.
That, takes 2 to tango, empathy, walking in there. It's a common theme throughout. So can you talk to that a little bit? Because there's a lot of people, in the play on the Go-Giver, I didn't understand this when I first read the book. It's go-getter. You're a go-getter. And people think it's all about throwing the punches, but it's not.
Yeah. Well, so here's an interesting first regarding go-getter. Yeah, it's a play on words, because the more usual term is go-getter, and then there's go-giver. But we would say we like people to also be go-getters if you define a go-getter as a person of action. Okay, because without action, obviously not. So we would say the opposite of a go-giver is a go-taker. But
understood. Yeah.
But still, but you're right that it was titled contrary to kind of positioned against the term go-getter, because that was it was more of a pattern interrupt in the in the titling. But yeah, you're absolutely right. When we talk, what Sadaharu O had said was he always considered the other pitcher to be his part instead of his adversary, his partner in hitting home runs. But here's the question, though. Well, yeah, Bob, but the pitcher probably didn't think of him as being his partner in hitting home runs. No, and what that says is you don't have to concern yourself with the other person having the same attitude as you have. It's always great when they do. And what we say is you can train that other person to, by operating as a go-giver, by placing your focus on bringing value to them. You're able to help them understand how to create that bigger pie, to collaborate as opposed to compromise. Okay. But if the other person isn't that way, that's okay. You only have to be that way. Sadaharu O had to see the pitcher as being his partner in hitting home runs. The pitcher didn't have to see him being Mr. O's partner in hitting home runs. And that's the key. So, but what happens is, yes, you can by virtue of you doing it, you are bringing that other person up to your level.
There is in the Go Giver Influencer, there is a bit, well, I'll ask you, are you a fan of Stoicism? And because I sensed some wisdom of the Stoics in some of the laws in terms of breathing, controlling your emotions. The judge talks about, being in traffic. And when you get cut off, of course, you're screaming at your own windshield and everything. And it's about how you react to it versus, the other person might be having a bad day. And,
sure.
Marcus Aurelius talks about that. Epictetus talks about those same things. And was that a coincidence or by design?
Well, I do love Stoicism. I mean, I think the wisdom is amazing. In the major lesson in that, which was responding versus reacting, there were really two sources. The sages of old, actually the sages in the Talmud said, who is a mighty person? And they answered, that person who can control their own emotions and make of an enemy a friend. And then I actually learned the term responding as opposed to reacting from Zig Ziglar, who taught that in one of his courses. But what it really does is it says that whether it's Stoicism or the Tao or the Talmud or whatever, wisdom is wisdom. It all goes back, or Aristotle or whomever, it all goes back. And success principles are success principles.
And yeah. And speaking of principles, so you end, well, not the very end, but the final law in the Go Giver Influencer is trust. How, I guess, how do I want to phrase this? If someone's been burned by trusting, or they're a very trusting person and they get burned, does it all balance out in the end, or am I looking at it the wrong way in terms of true trust?
So let's kind of go to the premise here of in terms of being a go-giver. And it's probably important for me to clarify that being a go-giver should never be confused with being anybody's doormat or being a martyr or being self-sacrificial in any way. So it's not like we're saying, oh, just do nothing and trust. Okay. And Stephen M.R. Covey wrote Stephen Covey's son from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen M.R. Covey wrote one of my favorite books, The Speed of Trust, which is just a work of remarkable excellence. And he does a whole thing with about trust and its importance. So, but there's a couple ways in which we mean trust. There's trust that when you do the work, when you do everything that you were supposed to do, and then you trust the outcome. Not that it is necessarily going to work out your way, but if you've done the right things along the way, you've probably created the environment where the chances are much better that it's going to come out the right way. So what you can do is you can trust the outcome without attachment. And that's what's so important. It's not that you don't prefer a certain outcome. It's not that you don't want a certain outcome. No, you prefer it, but your sense of happiness and peace of mind will not be dependent upon that. When that's the case, what you put out there is typically much more, the chances are much more that you are going to have the result you want. But when it comes to, that's trust in the process. Trust in the other person, you certainly wouldn't trust someone with something very big if they haven't earned that trust. Typically with me, by and large, I trust people until they prove they can't be trusted. And then and then you have to approach it differently. But you're certainly not going to just say, oh, I'm going to be naive and just, trust, this and that to whatever. No, you think it through, but you place your trust in the concept that if you do the right things, if you're thoughtful and use your head, if you operate out of that genuine, things are generally going to turn out right.
So for the final question, I want to ask you, this is the Freedom Club podcast, and we talked about entrepreneurship. Your book talks about entrepreneurs. A lot of people, they leave their 9 to 5 willingly or unwillingly, right? And they kind of charge out like Braveheart yelling freedom. And about maybe 5 years into it, they feel more in a prison than they did when they were working in the 9 to 5. What would you say to someone like that 5 years into it says, well, this isn't working. I don't feel free at all, for a variety of reasons. I could list them all off, but what would you say to them?
I guess I would have to ask questions to determine why they are where they are. You know what I'm saying? And why they feel what they feel. Because there's probably as many different reasons for that, as there are people who've left that 9 to 5 and then, found themselves stuck in another rut.
Sure.
And so forth. So, you don't know until you ask, but the questions are always interesting when you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's take, for example, like Jackson. Would you say that he was more free at the end of the book than he was at the beginning?
Oh, sure. In every way, emotionally and physically and financially and so forth. But Jackson, remember, was a very reluctant entrepreneur. Okay. He was an entrepreneur only because he found no other way of doing what he needed to do, which is okay. That people get into entrepreneurship that way and great things happen. But in his case, it wasn't necessarily the case because he really so disliked some of the aspects of the business itself. He had, he was the guy who Michael Gerber would call a technician. He was good at a certain thing and went into business thinking as long as he's good at that certain thing, in his case, it was the healthy, nutritious, delicious pet food that he had a knack for. Okay. But that doesn't mean he knew how to keep the books and do all the things that you needed to do and sell and so forth. So, that was a situation that, you go into business sometimes without really knowing that it's a business, and you can get in trouble and you can find yourself a few years later, if that far into it, saying, what did I get myself into? This is not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love, as a Gallup certified strengths coach, I love the ending whereby he could focus on his strength and his superpowers and bring in someone else to do the same.
Yeah, well, that's like me in my business. I have this business partner, Kathy Tajanel, who is absolutely, aside from being a wonderful person, she's absolutely brilliant. She's very technology savvy and she loves all that. And she's, so what our partnership allows for me to do those few things I do really well. People assume I do a whole lot of things well. I don't. I do a few very specific things pretty well, and I have confidence in those areas. The others, absolutely not at all. So, it's a great partnership where we, and so that, which doesn't always mean that you should always have a partner. It might mean that it's just people you farm out to do certain things and you contract to do. I never want anything I say to be taken as though, okay, that's the way to do it. No, we all have different ways depending upon how we seek happiness and how we plan to. And so, but yeah, for me, that's worked out just very well. I couldn't, have grown to the point I did without Kathy running the show.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure. And again, if you haven't read the books, please read them. There aren't many people who haven't read at least The Go-Giver, or at least one of the book. Millions of copies. But thank you so much. The latest book is The Go-Giver Influencer. I highly recommend it. We're going to put links, thegogiver.com. We'll put those in the show notes. But Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you for all you're doing. I love the value you bring to all of us.
Likewise. Well, thanks, Bob, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Likewise.